Bing, bada boom, boom, bang, boom, pop. Welcome everybody to the AJ's third Java tutorial. And in this tutorial, we're going to go over constructors and some basic methods. Now, what I did here was, as I showed you guys in the last tutorial, I made a Java folder, and then I made a class called Juice. And this was set up for me. And as you notice, it has the keywords public class juice, so you must have those. And what I named it must be the name of the class. I can't have juice lowercase or juice this or anything. It also will give me an error as shown here. The side little marks are called compiler errors. As you can see, it went away right there. And it's telling me I need to don't worry much about the triangles. You're really worried about the red, as in the red are actual errors, whereas the yellow are maybe you should comment it or maybe something's off, but the code will still work. These are known as compile time errors. There is another thing called runtime errors, which we will also cover. Now, everything that is within these brackets is in our class, which again we define the states and behaviors of it. And the first thing we're going to learn about is something called the constructor. Now, the constructor is something that when the class is initially created, the object, is initially created, then the constructor is run to maybe set some initial states and behaviors. The constructor can be used to initialize variables or do other things, such as maybe run some predetermined methods. And you define a constructor by saying public, and then you must call it the name of your class. So juice, brackets, and again, if your class is something different, it would just be that name. And I would have public juice. And now every time I create an instance of the juice object, which is the jargon, it goes into this class and looks at this constructor and does what is in this constructor. Now, I must say it is possible to not have a constructor, and Java will inherently make a blank constructor which it will run. So thus, if I don't have a constructor, Java will make one for you, but it won't write it down. It will just run one that looks blank like this. But let's say I wanted to do some stuff. So let's say we want to make a certain state when we make it, or initialize a variable. Now, what I'm going to do here is I am going to make a global variable. And a global variable is something that can be used throughout the class. There are also local variables which can only be used in certain methods. And you will see what I do here. Here I'm going to make a private integer apple, and actually I think I'll describe what public and private mean somewhere at the end of this tutorial. And apple by default is made to be 0. If I did not give it a value, apple would automatically be 0. But I'm going to give it a value of 7. I can give it a value of anything I want, but I'm going to make it 7, so I know that this variable is automatically 7. As I said again, if I were not to do anything to it, it would automatically be 0 by Java's default references. And so then other things I can do is I can say apple plus plus is an operation. And what this does is the same thing as, I'm going to comment my code here. It does the same thing as adding 1 to apple. So for instance, plus plus adds 1 to apple. So I'm taking apple, which is 7, I'm adding 1, and that is equal to the new apple. I'm assigning this to the new apple. So now apple is 8. If you're a big math guy, you would notice this is an incorrect mathematical operation. It's not true, and you'd be like, this isn't true. I have a PhD in math. I'm really smart. But that's how Java works. It's not more of an equal sign like mathematical. It's more of an assignment operation, and that's what you're doing. And Another thing to point out, what I did here with these double backslashes is it is a comment, and comments do not affect your code. For instance, that's why it's a totally different color, it's green. So I could, for instance, comment adds 1 to Apple, so anybody who's reading my code later on, maybe 200 million years down the road, because my code is super awesome, and everyone's like, whoa, I want to look at the great AJ's code, they can, if it's really complicated, they can be like, oh, that adds 1 to Apple. So now Apple is 8 after these assignments. But anyway, that's how you document your code. And while I'm at it, I might as well, it could get pretty tiresome. Let's say you have to write a lot of comments and you don't want to write 2 lines. What you can also do to have multiple comments is I can do / and then press enter. And then I can do as many comments as I want. All I'm doing is pressing enter, and it will automatically make a comment bar for me. But getting rid of that, so remember / is bigger comments. I got rid of the braces. And that's what comments do. And if you ever get a job programming, you want to comment your code, so maybe if you leave that job, someone else can look at the code and understand it better if you did some really complicated stuff. So just remember commenting, again, a little basic thing in Java. And another thing, as you noticed, I have kind of just put these semicolons arbitrarily, and, well, I haven't explained what they do. So Java reads code line by line, and, well, it needs to know when it's at the end of the line, and it does that by you declaring a semicolon. If I did not put a semicolon, I would get an error, and it would say, in tax order to complete the class body declaration, blah, 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 the value of juice.apple is not found. So it needs to see that to know to go to the next line. So it's like, oh, hey, I have a semicolon, it's time to go to the next line. Now, as you notice, for the public juice or the public class juice, I do not need a semicolon. That's because Java does not need a semicolon for declarations. There are other cases where you do not need semicolons, and they're pretty easy to figure out. It comes pretty naturally. Just remember, though, if you're making a declaration, you need usually a semicolon. Also, another thing, as if you've been thinking a little bit, I should put that back. If you've been thinking a little bit, you see that I did the apple ++ operation, which adds 1 to apple. And I also can do apple -, and that won't give me an error. And you can also guess what that does. That minuses 1 to apple. So really what I've done here is I've signed apple, the global variable apple, to 7. I've added 1 to it to make it 8, but then I minused 1 to it to make it 7 again. So really nothing has happened. But as you can see, you may need to use adding 1 and minusing 1 can be actually very helpful application, so they made a little shortcut. You could also just write equals apple -1. It really doesn't matter, but if you're cool, you do apple -, but you don't want to do it like this. Well, actually, doing like this won't do anything. It automatically will do that for you. You don't need to put that equals thing. So this is good. And what I just did there, I should show you that shortcut, is I press Control-Shift-F, and that automatically formats the code to make it easier to read. So if I have like this, and Apple's all the way up there, and then I just press Control-Shift-F on Windows, it will automatically put it back. And this is very helpful when you have some very long methods, and maybe they look out of funk. Eclipse will automatically try to make it look good. Okay, so now we have a global variable. We need to discuss we know what a constructor is. A constructor is what is called initially when the object is created. So when juice is created, it declares apple to be 7, it adds it, and it minuses it, which essentially does nothing but to make it 7. But I just showed you these commands just for some extra knowledge today. And to finish off, let's talk about public and private. Not many languages, unlike Java, have things that regulate the access to it. And that's what a public and private mean. Public means, like what it means. It means that anyone has access to this class or method or constructor. And private means you only have access, it means anything. You mean outside classes. As you can see, I have other classes here. The dad class is blank, But if I wanted to, the dad class could have access to this public class and this public class Juice and start talking to it, as well as Juice can talk to dad, as Juice is a public class. But dad cannot touch the apple because apple is private, and private means that you can only access or touch what is private inside the same class. So I can only mess with apple inside this class. Inside these parentheses is these brackets, I'm very sorry, is these I shouldn't say I'm sorry. Sorry is a weird thing. Inside these brackets is the only place where I can mess with private, where I can change apple or use it in my methods. And typical programming practice is to make your variables private. Now, why would you make them private? The reason because is if you're programming with other partners and making a big program together where, say, one person makes the Juice class, someone makes the dad class, and someone makes the testing class, these are just classes that I've been messing with, then you don't want someone to be able to just change apple, right? You don't want them to be able to mess with your class that you made, because why? You don't want someone messing with your stuff. There are two types of people who will try to mess up your code. Your coworkers are the devil, and probably the biggest devil of all, though, is yourself. You'll mess up yourself. So you want to make this private so no one can touch it except for you, because you're creating this class. Now, you could write methods, but the question arises, what if you need your partner who's creating the dad class and needs to mess with the apple variable? He can't touch it. But what you can do is you can make a public method which changes the variable to what, and only allows the guy who's making the dad class to do what he wants. So I'm making this method public, meaning that he can see it. He can see public outside of this class. So I'm having this public class called setApple, and it's going to take a pair, for instance, and what I'm going to do here is apple is going to equal pair. And so by making this, what error is it giving me? I am I am being very stupid. I shouldn't have done that because I was thinking of another thing, but that's how we'll do it today, guys. What we're going to do here is, now since I have this public method, I can now set the apple to whatever I want. So I have this integer called pair, which I could just call apple and then set apple to apple, but I won't do that because that could be a little confusing. And so what this does is this takes a parameter of pair, which is, it's like me initializing a variable, and then pair gets passed to apple, and then I return the apple. And what returns means is that it returns apple, so it will return the value that you set it to and go, oh, okay, that's now what apple is. And since it has public access, the person who's creating the dad class will now be able to handle the apple variable, but it will only be able to handle the apple variable the way I want it to. See, what if I didn't because if I didn't want him to be able to change or set the apple, then I could get rid of this method and he wouldn't be able to do that. Maybe instead I want a getApple method, which instead just returns the value of the apple integer, so then he can only look at what the value of the apple is, and thus is only to access the value and not change anything. This is very important, as you don't want anybody to be able to change what you work so hard on. Well, that sounds like a good day, guys. But to end, I want to bring up something I really love, just so I want to include a little bit piece of what you guys get to know about me. I really love Breaking Bad, and if anyone just ever wants to message me or talk about the show, I would love you so much, because I just love talking about Walt and how the show evolves, and just in my opinion, it's the best series of all time. But I hoped you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions, please feel free to message me and follow me on Twitter And thank you. Bye.